Hello, I have a very special friend and the guest today for our show to join me as a immigrant speak show, which we trying to get all the immigrants who fled socialist, totalitarian, oppressive regimes and come to join me to tell their stories and their concerns in this country. And the first time I have a Cuban immigrant, Maria, join me and to share her stories. Hey Maria, how are you doing?
Hey Lily, how are you?
I'm doing great. It's very hot here and humid, and our AC doesn't work, so I'm just like a sweaty, But hey,
Well,
we talk about
I'm
the
in
Philippines.
Vegas. I'm in Vegas, so it's baking here. We've been in triple digits now for a little over a week.
Wow, yeah, we have like about 90-degree, but our AC is not working. It's the humidity is killing me.
Oh dear, I
But it's
feel.
all right. We got the fans, we got everything, and when we have time, we'll go fix it. So anyway, tell us the audience we have here about your personal stories, what happened, and where you come from, and your family stories.
Okay, well, first of all, thank you for having me. I really appreciate that. My name is Maria Caminero. I am the president of the Cuban Heritage Foundation here in Las Vegas. We are actually going to be expanding into Los Angeles and Florida, and I'm very excited
Lovely.
about that. Yes, absolutely, to spread the message of freedom for the Cuban people. Yeah. Anyway,
Fantastic. I cannot wait to see you that growing.
thank you so much, Lily. Let me just, tell you and your audience a little bit about me and the things that myself and my family went through. I was born in Cuba, in Havana, in 1963. My father was actually in Castro's army when the revolution first took place. And he thought it was going to be, like many other people, he thought it was going to be a good thing. Communists always have a good propaganda, you
Yeah.
know. But right after he married my mother, he was actually asked to do things that went totally against what he thought the revolution was about. So I was a year old, and my mother was pregnant with my brother, and they decided to go inside the Uruguay embassy in Cuba. Back in that time, this is in 1965, Mexico did not have an embassy in Cuba. So Uruguay used to handle all of the affairs of Mexico. In October of 19, no, in November of 1965, my brother was born inside the embassy.
Oh,
45 days later, my brother, my mother, and I were given asylum, political asylum specifically, to go from Cuba to Mexico. My father was not granted asylum. So the three of us went to Mexico. My mother was 21 years old. I was a year and a half old, and my brother was 45 days old. So yeah, so that was it was a very rough thing for my mother. She was very young. We didn't know anybody in Mexico. Um, but it was especially hard leaving all of her family behind, leaving my dad behind, and not knowing what was going to happen with him. My father was actually inside of the embassy for another 2 years until Fidel came to see him himself and told my father that he was never going to get asylum, that he was never going to leave the island, and that if he wanted to live a normal life, he had to leave the embassy and integrate himself back into the Cuban society. And the minute that my father stepped foot outside of the embassy, he was taken to a Cuban prison.
oh my God! How long he stay
My
there?
father was a political prisoner for many years, and we had very little communication with him. He was in prison until 1978. So many, like close to, I would say 11 years. So between his time inside of the embassy and his time inside of the prison, you could say he was in prison for 16 years, almost
So you
17.
never saw your dad for first like 11 years of almost like your life. You
No,
don't
I didn't,
remember
I didn't
memory of
really,
it.
no, I didn't really see him for the first, I didn't meet my father until I was almost 17 years old.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Because I don't remember anything about, when I was a year old or a year and a
Yeah,
half
we don't remember. So he came to join you in Mexico or in the US?
in the US. So what happened was we lived in Mexico until 1968. And in 1968, we came to the United States. And I was 5 years old. So I've been in this country 55 years already.
Wow.
I met my father in 1979 when Fidel started allowing some of the older political prisoners to start leaving. And I was living in Miami at that time. That's where I grew up. And that's when I actually had an opportunity to meet my father after being imprisoned for so many years, like 16 years, you could say. He was a very destroyed man. He looked a lot older than what he was. He had a lot of visible scars. I mean, he was not in good shape.
How old was he that time when he come to join you?
He was in his 40s. He was in his 40s. So.
Did he adapt? Did he adapt with you and your family in a new life in the US?
Well, my mom actually had remarried, but they were good friends. My dad and my mom were good friends, and
Mhm.
after he came to the United States, and we got to meet one another. Shortly thereafter, he moved to California with my two older brothers.
Mhm. Okay, so that wow, that lots of people like immigrants like you have just like sad family stories.
Well, I will tell you this: the Cuban Revolution has been a monumental expert at dismantling the family unit. Not
That's
just
what
because
communists do. They want
not
to dismantle families.
exactly they dismantled the Cuban family. Uh, the first year of the Castro Revolution, the first year alone, he killed over 10,000 people. So the mentality is if you're not with us, you're against us.
Wow.
That's the communist mentality.
Have you ever been back since you came
I've,
here?
I've never been to Cuba ever.
Mhm.
Uh, I tried going when my grandfather was dying, and I was told I was persona non grata. So I wasn't welcome in Cuba. My mother and I have been political activists against the Castro regime ever since I can remember, since I was a little girl.
Oh
Um, my,
wow.
my mom was always involved in different anti-Castro organizations. So I've been a rebel against communism my entire life.
So we have something in common. We're all on the blacklist. We cannot go to our native country to visit
Exactly.
even. And
Exactly.
so
And
what?
I'm gonna be very honest with you at this point in my life. Even if today they would let me in, I wouldn't go. It's a matter of principle. You know, the Cuban government treats Cuban nationals that return back to the island uh, horribly. Okay, the Cuban government has managed to have us in exiles supporting them
Mhm.
because they take 20% of the money that you send your family.
Wow.
So it's horrible. Cuba today has amongst the highest inflation rates in the world. So we, the people that are in the exile community, basically have been sustaining the Castro dictatorship for many 64 years, you can say.
Mandatory 20%, huh, for the
Well,
mafia government.
so I have zero interest in going to Cuba and spending a dime inside of Cuba.
Do you still have family members there? You worry about that?
I do. I have family members that I do help because otherwise they wouldn't be able to eat. In Cuba, everything is rationed, and they've had a lot of problems with food supply because the food supply in Cuba goes mainly to the tourists, not to the people. So it's a very bad situation.
It'd be great if we let some of our college students who worship, socialism,
Oh
and
yeah,
they
they
should
think
go there visit.
it's a wonderful thing. Yeah. I
Yeah,
say, you know what? Go spend a year in Cuba without your American dollars and come back and let me know how wonderful it was.
maybe they will kiss the American grant when they enter
Exactly.
back to the country.
Exactly. National pride will all of a sudden really explode.
Yeah. So, what are some concerns today? Because you live American dream, you are self-employed, and you have great business in Las Vegas, and you are activists, organize, Cuban immigrants. What are some major concerns from your community?
Right now, the biggest concern that we have, other than the horrible situation for that the people are living inside of Cuba with, hardly access to hardly any food, constant going for days without electricity, without running water, basically repression. Since July 11th of 2 years ago, next week will be the second anniversary of the Cuban uprising, which basically put in jail over 1,400 young people, that have been
Wow.
extended anywhere between 8 to 25 year sentences just for saying, I want freedom. They weren't burning, they weren't doing any
I
of the.
remember that. I remember that. And I
Yeah,
remember that the Biden administration tell them, do not come here.
yeah,
Like as a
exactly,
political refugee, don't even take that boat ride, you know.
exactly,
Yeah, but at the
exactly.
same time, then he let the other people, economic refugees coming from open border in the southern state.
Well, I'm going to tell you what has happened since July 11th of 2021. What has happened is, a lot of Americans, especially Americans on the left, want to make you believe, especially the media, that that uprising took place because of Donald Trump. This is not true. They also emphasized that this took place because of COVID. This isn't true. During the Obama administration, that there was a supposed opening. This opening was only good for the regime. The people were led to believe for a very short period of time, it was like a mirage, that everything was going to change, that everything was going to be better. And it was very short lived because the intention of the Castro regime was for Americans to flood the island and tourists from other parts of the world to flood the island and provide them with the funds that they wanted, not just to stay in power, but also to open new hotels and more stores and things that were going to give them money. That was their main interest, not that the Cuban people would do better. That wasn't, that wasn't the perspective that the Cuban government had. So it was very short lived for the Cuban people. Uh, a lot of American companies that had considered opening shop in Cuba ultimately decided not to do so because there's basically no rule of law in Cuba. I mean, they make laws and change laws every single day. So for American businesses, that type of situation does not work. you know,
So
even
lots
though,
of companies left, huh? Or they did not even bother to go in.
well, the tourists, they had a lot of tourism. They had a tourism boom. And that's how the Cuban government was able to open all these beautiful new hotels. Cuba has a lot of beautiful keys, and they built a lot of hotels in those keys for the elite. Those hotels are not hotels that the Cuban people can go to. They
Oh,
cannot ever afford to go into a place like that. The average Cuban person makes approximately, I would say, the equivalent to $25 a month, if that. So they cannot go to any expensive hotel, you know. Um, the other situation is that during COVID, they had a shutdown, of course. And the, the rationing of the food wasn't being distributed accordingly. Also, the supplies, the medical supplies in the hospital were non-existent.
wow,
So people were seeing a lot of people dying in front of them. The
wow.
desperation of not having food and also seeing so many people dying around them was what
Mhm.
led to the uprising.
Wow. It's like
That
a
is
China's like a white paper protest. And also
exactly.
because COVID shut down, people could not get out of their homes and they were starving and they could not access
That was
medical care,
horrible.
hospital care.
Yes, that was absolutely horrible what happened
Mhm.
in China. So
Yeah.
anyway, so the young people took to the streets in
Hmm.
protest. We want food, we want freedom, but more than anything, the cries and the screams that you heard were for freedom, for liberty.
Yeah.
Because I think that the Cuban people have come to the realization that without freedom, they're never going to have anything.
So where's the place you can get a more truthful? Of course, we don't trust mainstream media anymore. Where can people go to get a more truthful, accurate reporting of
It's
Cuban
actually,
situation?
I will tell you, it's actually very, very difficult because even right wing media, American media, is not really reporting the things that are happening inside of Cuba. I'm going to give you a perfect example. China. China took, along with several other countries, but the biggest one was China. They took Cuba to court because Cuba owed them $1.1 million. Dollars. Okay, that's, basically,
Billion
yes, that's $1 billion.
US dollars.
Yes. And basically, they took Cuba to court in England. Okay, and they lost. The Cuban government lost. The Cuban government turned around and they appealed, and last week they lost the appeal. So basically, China has Cuba right where they want them. This is why China, aside from the fact that China has very little respect for the United States today, and they turn around and they fly balloons and they do whatever they want, you know, they set up spy bases with Russia inside of the Cuban island, and this is a very, very dangerous situation because Cuba will not say no to China on anything. And right now, with all that money that's owed to them, they're pretty much taking over a lot of Cuban territory.
It cannot
Territory,
be, yeah.
territory that is not up to the Cuban government to give up, because that territory belongs to the Cuban people. So this is very important.
Well, they can say the government always say land belong to the people, but actually it belongs to the state. So it's the same thing with China. They say land belongs to the people. We like Chinese citizens cannot buy land, but then they can decide, under pressure, or they have to do something for Chinese government. So they are giving them the land, need them to have a base, and the CCP government already did that in some other countries too through Silk Road Initiative and debt trap. If you cannot pay the money back, then you have to give up the base, the land, and allow the companies come in and to take over. So more and more countries are waking up to say we don't want to participate anymore in this debt trap Silk Road initiative. And
Exactly.
so how come you think that even the conservative medias, they don't know the truth, they don't report this?
They don't. I think everybody is too focused on the same thing day in and day out. Hunter Biden this, the other one that. And American people are really not informed of very important things that are happening internationally, really. And this is sad. I mean, you really have to go out of your way, like I do, to know what's happening everywhere, pretty much.
Mhm.
The foreign policy in this country right now is horrendous. As you saw, Anthony Blinken went to China and came back absolutely empty handed to the point where, Janet Yellen, which
Yeah.
makes no sense to me. She's not part of the State Department, but, she's going to
He's a
be.
treasury secretary. Why would they all go to China?
I know. I have no idea why she's going there on a diplomatic mission. It makes zero sense. But this is the way our country is operating today.
What kind
And
of people are running our country, right? Have no strength
it's
and
very sad.
incompetent and got lectured by Communist Party of China.
But I will tell you this. Under the Biden administration, leftist Cubans that are here and leftist Americans that see Cuba as a potential for business have been granted many licenses, more than ever before, to do business with the communist regime. And I will tell you something else that to me particularly is very sad as a conservative Cuban American. The vast majority of the states that do business with Cuba are the Republican states. Louisiana, Texas, Kentucky. I mean, large amounts of business with Cuba. Um, we had Amy Klobuchar call for the end of the embargo because she said, "Oh, our poor farmers need to be able to do business with Cuba." Blah 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 blah. I'm sure that they can find hundreds of other countries that are free, that do not oppress their people, to do business with. They can start doing business with El Salvador, for instance. Bukele is doing a phenomenal job in that country. He's putting away all of the gang members from the Mara Salvatrucha. He's making his country safe, prosperous. We should be doing business with countries like El Salvador, you know.
So you
So
said, in your opinions, that if we actually and take a harder stance against Cuba regime, maybe they can be brought down faster instead of have this long-term pain and romantic feelings about Cuba. But it's like they had with China, right? But China is still not free, and Cuba is not free. So it's like this just did not work. Those kind of foreign policy.
exactly. I will tell you what, right now, and I'm going to share a little bit of history with you. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, everybody claims that Kennedy saved the world because he made a pact with Nikita Khrushchev that, they would be removing those missiles. In exchange, the United States would never attack Cuba. Uh, there's a lot of rumors that a lot of the artillery and even some missiles did remain in the island. Personally, do not know whether that's true or not, but I will tell you this. When the Soviet Union crumbled, that was really the end of that pact. But we kept respecting it, okay? Despite the fact that the Castro regime has basically financed all of the guerrillas all over Latin America. The Castro regime, you need to think about it as a cancer that has basically spread throughout the Western Hemisphere. You have to think about it that way because it is, okay? and that's how we saw countries like Nicaragua, El Salvador, now more, Venezuela. I mean, Venezuela is a colony of Cuba. Okay, Cuba calls the shots inside of Venezuela and inside of Nicaragua. Okay, so it's very important to understand this. Now they're also calling the shots inside of Colombia. That's why there's a mass exodus of people out of Colombia right now. It's
Then you say that now fundamentally behind Cuba, then it's communist China, the largest totalitarian regime, my native country. They're calling shots too, right? Because they
Oh,
have.
no, absolutely. Daniel Ortega, the president of Nicaragua, has sold an incredible amount of land to China. So China owns a great part of Nicaragua. A lot of people don't know this, but this is a fact. They're doing a lot of business with Venezuela, a lot of business with Colombia, and a lot of business with Brazil. And Brazil right now is back under the hands of Lula da Silva, who is a communist.
Mhm.
And they recently had some kind of forum where they made a pact to protect Cuba against the United States
Mhm.
because of the criminal embargo, which there's no embargo. When you have a country that has done business with over 90 countries around the world, there's no embargo. The only thing that the United States won't do is give Cuba credit. Why should we? They pay
Mhm.
us cash. We're probably the only country in the world that they don't owe money to, but every other country they owe money to. Mexico, they owed, I don't know, like $500 million. I mean, crazy. We're talking about crazy things that happen with Cuba, but they never pay their debts.
So, what would you suggest to our federal government? Even I'm running, of course, for Congress too. What is
Well,
the best
I'm gonna,
effective
I'm
way to
gonna
bring down the Cuba regime?
I'm gonna tell you after the balloon crusade across the United States, and now with Russia and China both setting up spy bases inside of Cuba, Russia is in violation of the Kennedy-Khrushchev Pact. Therefore, the United States has zero reasons not to invade Cuba. But let's turn around and say we don't want to. The right thing to do right now, because China has already indicated that they're going to be working with old technological equipment that belongs to the Russians that is inside of Cuba, that they're
Mhm.
going to be looking to modernizing that equipment. They're setting up all these spy bases, and Russia being in violation of the Kennedy Khrushchev Pact, the right and moral thing for the United States of America to do is a naval blockade. Nothing goes in, nothing goes out. That is the right thing to do because China and Russia need to get out of Cuba. This is a national threat to our security. Okay. I don't like having China and Russia 90 miles away from American shores. I
Yeah.
personally have a big problem with that, and every single American should have a big problem with that. So, the message to China and to Russia that needs to come out of the White House is leave the island immediately, or I will surround it. That's what a president with moral authority, okay, and moral compass would do. Do I expect the Biden administration to do that? Absolutely not. And it's very sad because, as much as people might dislike Donald Trump, if Donald Trump were in office, he would do it. Donald Trump has been the only president of the United States that has kept his promise to the Cuban exile community. The first and best thing that he could have ever done was reverse anything that Barack Obama did towards Cuba, because anything that Barack Obama did to reestablish relations with Cuba only helped the Castro regime, not the Cuban people. That needs to be made very clear. A lot of people are under the fake and crazy idea that lifting embargoes crumbles regimes. You and I both know that that is not the case. What happened when the United States lifted the embargo on China? Okay, we had an embargo on China. It was an arms embargo, but we had it. What happened when that went away? What happened when Richard Nixon and George Bush turned around and started doing business with China? The only thing that we have done as Americans with a confessed enemy is empower them. We depend on China for everything. It's ridiculous.
Mhm.
Look at
Well,
everything that we've been through during COVID with supply chain.
yes,
You
yes.
know, it
It's
was a
called
horrible
domestic
situation.
diplomacy. Yeah. Well, I wish our government would listen to first-hand experience immigrants like us who love this country and
Yes.
who will, at least have some kind of channel to communicate with us and in
Hmm.
terms of our, policies. But it's we're trying. But thank you so much for joining me. We'll be in touch. I will, of course, and turn to back to you. And hopefully we will discuss more about effective policies when it comes to deal with communist Cuba. Of course, I'm being Chinese American here and you're Cuban American. I think we put our brain together with lots of immigrants like us. We will defend our country and we will bring down the communist regimes. Thank you so much, Maria. I appreciate you joining me.
Lily, thank you so much for having me. Good luck with your campaign. I will encourage everyone to support you. You're a wonderful person. You understand what freedom is all about, and you understand how easy it is to lose it.
Yes, I
So
do.
God
That's why.
bless you, and good luck to you.
Thank you, Maria. I appreciate it very much. And I will have you back soon. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye bye. Bye bye.